not write on the teleprompter. I don't know what that is. I've never seen that.
No, there is. We are gonna do Sting, yeah.
Okay, but yeah, I can't read it. There's no words on it.
Okay.
There's no
Play
words.
us out.
Play
us out. What the hell does that mean? Play us out.
Sting is gonna do it's a video. Sting video.
What is? I don't know what that means. To play us out. What does that mean? And the show.
Turn it up.
Yeah.
All right, go. In 5, 4, 3. That's tomorrow, and that is it. Again, 5.
That
4,
breath.
He's so pissed.
That deep breath.
With I can't do it. I'll do it live. Okay. No, I'll do it live. Fuck it. I'll write it and I'll do it live.
I'm dying.
Thing sucks. 4, 3. That's tomorrow, and that is it for us today. I'm Bill O'Reilly. Thanks again for watching. We'll leave you with Sting and a cut off his new album. Take it away.
Take it away.
Why is this so goddamn good to me?
The best part is like they have like the internal camera, like the security footage after he like gets off the air and he rips off the mic and throws it.
I've never seen that.
What? You haven't seen this?
Not the, well, I haven't seen the, like that after.
Yeah, no, you I think that's part of the original video. Oh my god.
Fucking
I'm dying.
Hold on, pop. Oh my god, this shit's working.
Fuck it,
Pop,
we'll
pop,
do
pop,
it live.
pop.
I think we're gonna use that as our intro. Let's just go, boys. So fuck it, we'll do it live. Welcome to Alfalfa. At the end of the last episode, we mentioned something at the very, very end of the last episode that I think we should mention at the beginning. So we talked about how we really want to just generally open up the conversation, engage with you guys, open up the community. We're having a fuck ton of fun, and it seems like you guys are too, and we really appreciate you for listening and being here. So what we would ask you is if you want to be more directly connected with us, we have our own little iMessage thread. We have a WhatsApp thread with this extended Alfalfa support squad of mostly in real life friends, and we're talking about just generally expanding that to the listeners of this show and just growing this whole thing, right? I mean, that's the whole point, is to engage with you guys and help you guys and give more and more Alfalfa. So hit us up on Twitter, send us a DM, and just say Alfalfa, and we'll add you to our list. And we'll start working on what that looks like. I have no idea what it's going to look like. I don't know if it's going to be a Discord or a Telegram or a fucking, I won't say Facebook group because everybody hates those. But the point is, we will do something. And we'll start to just open this thing up between episodes. We've also been talking about working toward doing these live every once in a while and taking questions and just engaging with you guys and all kinds of stuff. So again, send us a DM on Twitter with the word Alfalfa, and we'll save your info and we'll add you to the list. Also, if you want more content related to crypto, Collective Shift. Check out Collective Shift, collectiveshift.io. Collective Shift is an investment education hub with a ton of advice and information on everything related to crypto, from the absolute beginning of your journey all the way through the most advanced levels. I'm learning every single day, for sure. And we're putting out all kinds of stuff. Actually, this week, something really cool that Collective Shift did is we're putting together an NFT portfolio. And this is a long-term blue chip NFT portfolio. And we're actually buying. We're buying, and we're like basically taking you along for the journey with us. Same thing with like short-term sort of early stage opportunities. There's a portfolio for that. So this is everything from community to actually getting access to the latest research from analysts to what are we actually buying, trading, selling, and showing you the whole thing. So definitely check that out and use our code Alfalfa at the checkout for a special little perk and discount. Again, the link to that is in the description below. Use code Alfalfa. And last but not least, before we kick off, we had a fun little listener review, Nick. that I thought
Oh,
we
yeah.
might.
Let me
Read
pull
out.
that bad boy up here. So from Johnny02, I'm not sure who Johnny02 is, but thanks for listening. His review on Apple Podcasts was great show. Listen weekly, and put it in the same class of expert knowledge along with Bankless and Kevin Rose. 100% required listening for those taking advantage of opportunities in Web3. Would love to join the private community WhatsApp if I can score an invite. So Johnny02 wants an invite. If you guys want one too, if you guys think it'd be a good idea for us to kind of, pull everyone together and share some alfalfa together, let us know, and we'll keep working on it. Put something together. We can do that, because I think that would be. I personally think that would be fun. But if you guys think it'll be worthwhile, then let us know, and we'll get to work on it.
I think Johnny02 deserves an invite. Let's get him in there.
Yes.
And with that kind of review,
He sure does.
Thank you, Johnny.
So Johnny02, if you're listening, we need to be able to contact you. So hit us up on Twitter. Send us a DM.
EMS.
So that we have your handle, your email, and we'll get you in the list. So yeah, thank you guys. Like, we really appreciate it, and we're having a lot of fun, and we're listening. Speaking of listening, I've been doing too much listening, too much reading, too much everything. I think we all kind of are on the same page around this, but the whole space has been very overwhelming lately. From crypto to Web3, politics in general, everything has just become heavy over the last couple of weeks. And I don't know if it's just that there's more things happening, which is obviously part of it, or that there's just more and more instantaneous access to this information on multiple platforms, hitting at every possible angle from every citizen journalist all at once, and my brain is going to explode. Like, that's the way I've just been feeling lately. But there's been some chaos happening in Web3, and I think, Stephen, you should break that down, because the whole space in general, crypto Web3 space, has been like on fire, from fraud and the wormhole deal to people, hundreds of millions of dollars, to people getting canceled and cancel culture making its way in. I don't even know which piece to hit first, but
Never a dull moment. Never
it's
a
been
dull
nuts.
moment.
Yeah,
this
it's
last
been a
week was
nutty
definitely
week.
less crypto,
Yeah.
more politics, but yeah.
Yeah, very little like coin stuff is on my mind from last week. I mean, we had the wormhole hack, the largest bridge. I don't know if it's the largest bridge to Solana. Maybe the Solid bridge is larger, but like a huge bridge to Solana. What people use to transfer coins to Solana from Ethereum. There's $300 million worth of Ethereum basically exploited. And I think Jump, the trading firm, along with the other VCs who kind of back Solana, just made it whole. I think they're making money hand over fist. I think they kind of control the MEV of the entire Solana network, so they're able to kind of profit on a lot of the transactions in the Solana dark forest there. So maybe not a big financial hit to them, but that was pretty crazy. I mean, for a while, like 30% of all the ETH on Solana or something like that was like effectively worthless, or 100% of the ETH was 30% worthless. So that was pretty crazy. But I think the other stuff that was big last week has been this whole debate that's sprung up on Web3 and cancel culture. Had a lot of bleed over from the Joe Rogan events in the real world into crypto. Notably, there were two people canceled. The first one was this guy Brantley, Brantley.eth. I believe he was a developer for ENS, right? Somebody pulled up they did the old pull up your tweets from 5 years ago game.
Fun game.
And
should we all like be looking back like anytime soon? Should there be like a date in the calendar?
Please don't tell anybody to start searching through my Twitter. I don't know. I didn't even know I just put that out there. Like, yeah. So I mean, he tweeted some stuff that like is not. I think most people would say is not like ideal, right? Have you guys seen the tweet?
I have.
Yeah.
Pretty
it's
heinous.
his personal religious beliefs is the way I look at that. And
I'm kind of torn on this, right? Like, so the tweet is homosexual acts are evil, transgenderism doesn't exist, abortion is murder, contraception is a perversion, so is masturbation.
I mean,
and porn.
I heard that down at the park today from a homeless person. Like, what's the, I hear that all the time. Like,
Or from your pastor at your local church.
yeah.
I'm guessing
Sorry,
people got a
yeah.
little more upset over the homosexual and transgenderism part versus the porn, although maybe.
But I
some people
literally
out there
hear that everywhere.
really
And if
love the
social
porn.
media is the town hall of our digital world, my question that comes up immediately with all this stuff is always like, why? I don't know. Like, how much is a person's personal God, it's so hard to even like.
Well, can we
Who
set
they-
a little backdrop on
Yeah.
on why this is particularly interesting? So, ENS, Ethereum name service, you can set up your own .eth, and not only can you use it as like a handle and part of your profile, but you can use it to send ETH back and forth, any kind of ERC20 tokens. It's just as good as any Ethereum address. You can use it to name your wallet, brand your wallet. But in particular, he's director of operations at ENS. He's part of this public good for the community. And not only was he part of this public good, but ENS did an airdrop to all previous users. If they had an ENS domain, I think it had something to do with how old and how many. But in any case, it was a really successful airdrop. People made tens of thousands of dollars for free for just participating in this community. So if you can imagine, this person's director of operations, and he built quite the public profile and quite a bit of public love, because he was part of, airdropping cash to this community for being, participants. And a few months later, this comes out, and it's kind of like a shock because people didn't notice it. And he comments that, oh, you finally noticed that, like, I have Catholic as the first thing in my bio. And to him, it's, been part of his personality this whole time. And who he is as a person. And they dug it up from, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years ago. But so you had everyone kind of loving this community member who's driven such a good public good for the community. And now something comes out that no one likes. And so we have this persona that everyone built in their head is this, great developer, director of operations, creating this great technology. And now it conflicts with what everyone kind of deems as what a good person is. So we have this conflicting thing. And it's, should you care what he thinks? Because he's obviously doing a good job. I mean, not only is he doing a good job at building a technology platform, but he airdropped cash into everyone's pocket. So I think that background is important, in the build up to this, and why maybe it was pretty shocking for people to hear. And then some kind of conflict everyone faced in terms of, well, he's doing a good job at his job, but there's this other thing, and where do we go from here? So I think it's important to provide that context on the story, I guess.
Yeah, thank you for that. That was an important backdrop.
Yeah. I think right away you're seeing that, like, we lump the whole crypto community together a lot, like just a blanket term, but there are very distinctly like different people within, what we would call crypto Web3. When I looked at a lot of takes on this, a lot of responses, and there's a very clear divide between who I'd classify as kind of like the traditional, like OG Bitcoin kind of cypherpunk-esque movement versus like the people who kind of came in for NFTs. And it kind of makes sense if you think about it. I think that like there are two different like human mindsets, right? We think of this kind of like creative artistic mindset versus like the anarcho-capitalist mindset, right? Those are two different types of people. It's like one of the reasons why we see so much of like Hollywood is in like entertainment is leftist, right? Whereas like, if you go into college, the most conservative major is engineering, right? There's just something about the way people's brains operate, right, as a default, and they kind of go into these two camps. So I saw a lot of kind of like uneasiness, to put it lightly, about the Brantley firing from the kind of OG crypto community, and virtually everybody in NFT land. I don't want to lump everybody in together, but like overwhelmingly the people in the sort of like NFT space, right, that sect of Ethereum, were like pretty for it, right? And I think both groups like make really good points, and really bad points, and whether it's good or bad, it sort of kind of depends on your spectrum and sort of like how many layers deep you're thinking, right? I've observed that a lot of the crypto people, the OG crypto people, they're thinking about this from like a first principles perspective, right? Like they're like, yes. So if you look at this, it's most of us would think that it's bad, right? In isolation. But what are the downstream effects of what you want to do? Like what kind of precedent will it cause? What kind of rules are we setting up in this new world that we're building? And what are the trade-offs going to be of what that kind of world we're building is, right? Whereas I think a lot of people were just like, no, this is just wrong, and we don't have to tolerate it. From my perspective, I think like there's obviously like something uneasy about we're building this world that is supposedly quote unquote decentralized, right? A world where, in theory, someone, for better or worse, should be sort of like free from like being oppressed by these kind of like centralized power structures, if you will. And one of the main things that I think kind of sucks about the Brantley firing is that it's not like he was really fired by the community in a consensus way, right? Like I think there was a nonprofit that kind of handles the dev for ENS, if I'm not mistaken.
True Names Limited,
that,
I believe.
Yeah, and that nonprofit, whoever runs that, they're just like, nah, he's out. And something about that does feel kind of wrong, right? I don't know what you guys think about this, but it feels dirty to me. Like what he said does feel dirty. We also should acknowledge that what he said is literally probably a belief of like half this planet that's like really religious and adheres to like the Old Testament.
Maybe
right?
not
So
half, but
we're kind
a
of
lot.
Yeah, a lot. We'll call it like billions of people. I venture to bet there's a billion people who believe what he believes.
We'll put 1 B on it.
Yeah, and like people I know who are very Catholic and who may share some of these beliefs, I know they would point out like he didn't say homosexuals are evil. He said the acts are evil. Hate the sin, not the sinner. Some people would be like, nah, it's a cop out, whatever. But I think that is worth a little bit of merit. But like if we're gonna take this like position, does that mean we just exclude everybody who's like Old Testament religious from all of Web3? Is that
I personally
the
don't get it. I really don't get it, Stephen. And I'm trying to be like more thoughtful about this and try to like, I would love to even cross-examine myself a little bit on this, but to me, this is pretty terrifying. I think it's an absolute tragedy. I don't know the context and the details enough, but I also don't think the details really matter here. This is a person who made a statement on Twitter, regardless of when they made it. I don't care if they made it yesterday or if they made it 5 years ago. The point is a person. This is their belief. I don't care what they believe. What does that have to do with your job? I don't give a fuck. And the reality is that if everybody was going to get canceled from their jobs and fired for things that they say and do in their personal lives, then no one should have a job. No one should have a job. And if we're going to talk about this whole like decentralized future and the way that we're trying to build it, that's a whole other bucket that's really interesting. But the most important thing here for me is that do I think what he said is wrong? I think it's disgusting. I couldn't disagree more with somebody like that. I think if he was sitting here right now, I'd be like, bro, you're a fool. Like, you still believe stuff like that, bro? Like, I mean, I'm saying it to you right now. Like, if you're listening, Brantley, like, you really still believe stuff like that, man? You should come have a drink with us if you drink. Let's talk about this. That's absurd. Like, if you want to be religious, but don't go around spewing hate. Now, if you want to do that on Twitter, you know how we dock you? We unfollow you. You know how else we dock you? We take away your privileges in life socially. We don't take your job away from you. If you don't like somebody, you don't like them. You delete them, you block them, you unfollow them, you move on. You don't take somebody's job from them because of something they do in their personal lives. If we're going to do that, then we might as well just become China. That's it. Like, that's China to me. That's like, you did something in your personal life. I'm going to dock your social score, and it's going to affect your ability to buy plane tickets, get a job, get a rental property. Like, how does it not become that? That's already that. Maybe I'm like oversimplifying this, but to me, it's like an absolute tragedy.
I mean,
well, I disagree with you.
What's your limiting principle? Like, what if the first line was Jews should not exist?
My limiting principle, I guess, would have to be like, honestly, just in the legal system, what is a crime and hate speech. I think that if the person does something to hurt the company, like from a perspective of fraud, that's very important. I think that if they directly affect the company, out. You can't accept that. But if we're talking about personal beliefs, like what if the narrative was that it's really disrespectful to say you're a cow, and this person just had tweets that said they were a cow? I just don't understand how we're going to draw these lines. Yeah, I mean, it is the same thing. Like you can, like, I know that's a terrible analogy, but like whatever it is. I mean, I'm not, and again, this is open to anybody. Like Eric, I want to hear your take on this, but whatever we say socially is acceptable, who defines that? And then if the person that defines that is able to say, okay, we as the company are going to say you have to be out because of things that you've said, then everybody is up for getting not only canceled, but losing their jobs and losing their livelihood because of personal beliefs.
Well, I think I'm glad you admonished his views, because of
course, they're terrible.
I mean, they're terrible. And frankly, we're 4 individuals from 4 different ethnic backgrounds, and we're best friends in real life. So like, of course, we're not espousing racism, but I've thought about this situation, and
wait, did he say something racist too, or just homophobic?
Sorry, prejudice. Prejudice
Okay.
is the better term. Sorry, but like they're cut from the same cloth, aren't they? Like it's the same deal. If you're just like prejudiced against a group, it doesn't matter their color or whatever. The Brantley thing, I think, comes down, for me, I've thought about it a lot. It comes down to freedom. Right. So like on the one hand, you have Brantley's freedom, and the other hand, you have like the organization's rights and their freedoms. So in this situation, Brantley has his right to free speech, or has his right to his own beliefs. Okay. And he expressed those beliefs, and that's good. That's fine. He's not in jail or anything, like he's not in jail. He's free to express those beliefs. People that work with him don't like those beliefs. Okay. And then you can even take it a step further. He alienated existing customers of that protocol, and he existed potential customers of that protocol. So it's like, it does actually hurt the business. Like
but you're asking him to be a human that is fully encompassed in his job only, to not have the ability to freely express himself outside of the role that he represents at his company. I had people that worked for me in the past that were of the exact same belief system, by the way, that had the same tweets. I have people that were trans. By the way, I've been in a unique position that I had trans employees. I've had gay, lesbian, bisexual, everything under the sun employees. They are very active politically and in their personal lives. If I woke up one day and was like, I've had enough of this, I'm going to fire you, that's wrong.
But here's the beauty of it, is that the people, it was like a social jury. It wasn't like there was a government involved, like it was just like peers reviewing each other. So like in this case, Brantley expressed his views. Those views were not, like espoused. And they said, like, we don't want these views within our culture. And they removed him. And I think that's okay. That's actually okay. Because Brantley is now free to go somewhere else where his views are more accepted. Brantley is a talented individual. Like I delegated my vote to him, because I still hold ENS tokens. I think he's good at at his job.
So then our job and our aptitude and everything comes down to our personal beliefs also. I just don't know. I think this is a good discussion. It's like, where's the line?
But he did actually hurt the business. Like there is an argument to say that, like, hey, look, our customers can be people of.
What are you defining as the business? ENS? A protocol? Because this is like a crux of what we need to talk about here, right? Like what you're talking about is a little more cut and dry in the real world.
It's also, Steven, I just want to add something.
With you.
I just want to add something to your point that you're about to make, because you can express this better. If we're going to say that the entire protocol needs to be representative of the same views, then that doesn't make sense to me whatsoever. That means that everybody at that protocol or at ENS needs to have the exact same views if they work for that company, is basically the argument. There's no other way about it.
Yeah, I mean, I would describe it more as like there's like a particular like Overton window for ENS, and it's not that everybody has to have the same view. It's just that like the aggregate of all these views must be contained within these lines, like however wide you want to draw those lines, which is maybe not unreasonable. But like I don't think this is something like we've ever really wrestled with before. Like I don't know what the analogy is for the real world. Like in the real world, like it's pretty clear to me that like two things are true at the same time. Like one, I do think it's ridiculous like how much businesses sort of like just ruin, or people just ruin people's careers. Like sometimes it might be warranted, but it's mostly ridiculous, right? I also simultaneously believe that businesses probably should be able to, have a lot of free reign in who they hire and why they hire them. Although I should note that tends to be like a one-way street, right? Like we tend to like really force businesses to like expel people with particular beliefs, and we really force them to not expel people with other particular beliefs, right? So it's not like an even thing. But in crypto, like is ENS a business? It's a protocol, right?
It doesn't matter. It's an organization. It's an organization run by human beings. And if you're working alongside other human beings that you just don't want to work alongside with anymore.
But that organization didn't fire him. ENS didn't fire him. The DAO didn't fire him.
Well, the ENS community did vote. They made a vote, and the question was, should we remove Brantley.eth as a community steward? I don't know exactly what that means, but it looks like the vote won 75 to the yes, 25% to the no. So it wasn't unanimous by any means, but it was a significant majority said we should remove him as steward. And then it looks like the kind of entity owners of this foundation or nonprofit, True Names Limited, then further on went to remove him as director of operations of that entity. So there's like two components to it. So that there was a vote, but then yes, the centralized group did remove him as a.
It's important for me to note. It's important for me to note that Brantley is not dead. He's not in jail. His career's not finished. Like he's free to go work somewhere else now. That's actually very important. And he did lose his job.
I totally agree with that.
There are many jobs.
I totally agree with that. And I want to clarify one thing in my personal point that I've made so far is that I'm not talking about should the company do this, should the True Names Limited, whatever, do this, should there have been a vote, should there not have been a vote. I'm literally just talking about like objectively, like the world that we're building, especially in Web3, is this right or wrong? Just generally morally, like, do we want to see this type of behavior is really where I'm playing at. But as far as like, can they, should they, was fine, do it. Like, that's like, yes, build the type of protocol and the type of organization and the type of DAO with the type of people that you want to be surrounded by, and ultimately leave. Like, that's probably the right decision to leave it up for a vote and say, should this person be involved anymore? Like, that's probably the best decision.
Let the community decide what the culture should look like. And
but is that what we're deciding though? Is like the thing for Web3? Web3 is just sort of like mob rule of what
Web3
people want.
is just like anything else. Like it's
not. Like the US is
like,
designed to not be mob rule, for example, right? Like the US government is expressly designed from a structural perspective to protect minority rights, right? And in crypto, we've kind of got this like, oh, the DAO voted thing but like it's an open question to be like, how good is that? Like, are all those votes equally important? Is what the pure majority thinks on particular things like really all that matters, right? Because like we may agree that like the Brantley thing, him losing his position, maybe in this instance is worth it. We may sort of disagree that people should be at like a high level, like digging through people's past and like character assassinating people like this. But like we may think it's warranted, right? Just like a lot of us may have thought that maybe banning Alex Jones from Facebook back in the day was warranted. But these things never stop here, right? They inevitably start sliding to something else. And
that was my stupid cow analogy. That's what I'm trying to say. Let's come up with a better one. Everybody wants to be the police until they realize that the gun is pointed at them. And that's what I want to be careful about. Like,
can I argue against myself real quick?
Please.
Because I actually think like just because I think what everyone is trying to actually espouse is this idea of tolerance and inclusivity.
Yes.
Right. But then like, do you like, so you have tolerance and inclusivity. do you tolerate and include people that don't have the same opinion as you? Do you tolerate and include people that have the opposite opinion as you? Do you tolerate and include people that have some sort of opinion that is actually intolerant and not inclusive? Like I actually like that's my argument against, but I think like that true inclusivity and tolerance would bring in those folks as well.
Of course.
Yeah, I mean, your point like actually brings up something I was thinking of earlier, which is that there's like sort of this like irony in people of like a very kind of leftward mindset who kind of like think like these types of things are positive, like this act of like cleansing the forest and all this shit is good. And it's weird because they sort of, on the one hand, they all believe in this idea that there are these sort of like power structures in the world that like suppress like minority individuals, right? And they talk a lot about these power structures and oppressors and oppressees, right? But then like when push comes to shove, they don't really want to like upend that system. They just want to put themselves in charge of the same system. So they create the same exact structure where there are a bunch of people who have power who are oppressing a bunch of people who don't have power. And they justify it because like, I am right and I am moral and I am good. But in reality, it's just this like perpetual system of people trying to climb to the top of the pyramid and grab the gun to point at somebody, right? So that's just a system that's going to like be this never ending cycle.
It's disgusting.
That it never breaks, right? And it's just going to keep spinning and spinning and spinning until the wheel just like explodes, right? So we need to strive
Ponzi,
for like
Steven.
yeah, like we need to not like necessarily not necessarily that it's bad to, you know, censor these people in some fashion, right? But we need to strive to not just like clear the forests, right? We need to strive to like figure out how to build like a system of dealing with this that isn't going to propagate the same thing, because like these people forget like someday 50 years from now they might not be in power again, right? Like what if like 50 years from now another kind of like Trump-esque figure takes power in the US and he just decides that like patriotism is the utmost highest value, and like, you know, and promoting transgenderism is inherently anti-patriotic, ergo we must like cleanse you from all of the it's the same logic, right? It's basically just like he who is in power decides what's moral and gets to like put his will upon everybody else. It's a bad system, and we have an ability to build a better system here. You know,
I can always count on you.
We're not doing it so far. We're just replicating like the same damn system. And even if you maybe agree with this one event in isolation, it will go off the friggin' rails, and it's not going to be good.
What I liked about this one, or it's awful to say what I liked about this one. It's like what I understood about this one, which I don't understand with the Joe Rogan one, is that we didn't get sort of like a higher level of authority coming in. Like it wasn't like the White House came in with their take on it. It was like society, like our little community governed that themselves. And I think that's okay. The Joe Rogan one has more nuance because it's like, well, now you have this other authority figure on top of that, putting its thumb on the scale. And that to me is just like way harder to conceptualize.
Can I go back to something you brought up there and earlier that I think I like wanted to pick apart a little bit? Sure, like you brought up this idea that the community voted, people voted, right? But to me, like this is like that, what's that like Nassim Taleb phenomenon where you have the ultra vocal minority who just sort of like imposes their will upon everybody? You have the one vegan person who makes the Thanksgiving dinner of 16 people vegan, right? It's the same thing here with DAOs, and the same thing here with Twitter. There's like a vocal people who care a lot, and then there's a lot of people who maybe don't care that much. So the vocal people are going to sort of create the illusion that there may be this consensus where there's not. And even if we vote, right, it's the same thing, right? There may be like 20% of the DAO is so motivated to vote, and the other 80% like don't care that much, right? Maybe they should, but they don't, and then you end up with this kind of like tyranny of the minority situation. Again, I'm not saying it wasn't justified here, but like you can very easily see how this will play out if we
I agree with you. That's a good point, but in this case, it wasn't like a purely democratic situation. I think TNS fired it, and like all four of us are business owners. If you don't like working with somebody, like, do you think as a business owner you have the right to remove somebody from your employ? Like I would think
I just inherently refuse to think of these things as businesses.
Nuanced.
I want to think of them as like a new type of thing. Like I don't think a DAO is a business. I don't think a protocol is a business. I think it has a lot of business like tendencies, but it's it is like at its core, what a protocol on Ethereum is supposed to be is this like absolutely permissionless thing. It just seems weird that on the one hand, you could have this permissionless thing that anybody can use, but on the other side of it, there are people who are effectively being fired for being religious, whether or not you may think that their beliefs are bad, right? That is kind of what they're doing. And I don't think that those religious views are good, but that's what you're doing. You're basically saying like
exactly
nobody who is like a real like old school Catholic can work at this protocol, right? And then there'll be a bunch of people who are like, well, I'm Catholic and I don't believe that. But I know a lot of Catholic people who would just be like, no, you're not Catholic. You're a cafeteria Catholic. And you just devolve into this like
TNS
ridiculous,
TNS is not a decentralized protocol, is my understanding. And TNS, what's it called?
TNL.
TNL, the sort of
name
umbrella. Yeah, the umbrella
you're talking about
organization on top. TNL is what fired him. ENS didn't fire him. TNL is what fired him, and TNL is like a business like we own.
Correct, but that's like that in and of itself is a problem to me. The idea that we're living in this world where we kind of like
where we
jerk
can fire
ourselves
somebody
off about about like how decentralized and open and everything is, and is the reality that
that's
underneath
not
it
decentralized. TNL is not decentralized. Just the same way that your businesses aren't decentralized either. You're the owners of them.
But that's my point.
Somebody.
Like people don't think about TNL; they think about ENS. Like nobody's sitting around talking about ENS and thinking of it as this like centralized, like little nonprofit behind the scenes. Like everybody's thinking of things as like the forward facing stuff. What is ENS? Oh, it's this decentralized protocol. Well, is it really if it's just all controlled by some nonprofit behind the scenes that could just like fire anybody
Stephen,
they
that's
want?
just because a lot of the structure of these organizations is a combination of both a decentralized organization, a DAO, and what's necessary there, but also like corporate structures that are necessary to have in place to be like a profitable running business. And everyone's figuring that out in real time. And to your earlier point, Eric, like, yeah, if you don't like working with somebody, can you fire them? Again, look at the judicial system, look at the laws. In California, it's at will employment. If I fire somebody because I don't like them, sure, they can sue me for discrimination. Would I fire somebody because I don't like them? No. Like I'd try to see if like, can they perform? It would come down to performance, and I would try to settle differences. If the differences are too extreme, then it becomes a different conversation. It's like, yo, we're really different here. You don't fit into our culture. What's your deal? And I'd have a conversation about that. And it would be like, do you think you're a fit here? What do you do? You know, there's a whole stream of events that would happen. And instead, this was just like tweet that is literally grounded in, as Steven said, a large proportion of people that are of a specific religion believed the same exact thing that he said, and he was let go for that. He was fired for that. That's the part that's concerning.
Here's an interesting fact in the timeline here is that ENS launched on May 4th of 2017. His tweet in question was in 2016, before ENS was even conceived or launched. And throughout his tenure there, no one ever questioned whether he was prejudiced or holding anyone back. In fact, I think before this, people would say he did an amazing job, and he got like a lot of kudos for doing such a great job. He's a talented person, and no one would ever guessed he had these views because he was inclusive of everyone and did such a great job. So I guess my question is, someone has those views, but it doesn't actually take form in how they are involved in the business and how they execute the plan for the business. It's to the point where it's never even come up. I mean, the reason this was so shocking was because no one would ever expect it from him, because, in their interactions with him or how he executed the plan would have never led anyone to believe those are his beliefs. And so not only was his execution of the plan, non-prejudiced, but these views that were expressed before the business was even launched. And it doesn't look like after the business was launched and after his involvement with the business, if we want to just use that term, did he kind of continue to publicize them? Now, he didn't deny when this was surfaced, he didn't deny that he said that, but he didn't necessarily vocalize them and make his leadership position in the company somewhat of a political platform to espouse his views. So I kind of have this big question, like, if what he said was not integrated into the business, how he operated, and it was even before this business even existed, and not only did he not operate, according to his views. He was pretty open-minded, but and he didn't even use his leadership position as a platform to communicate his own personal views. Does that change anything? I think there's something to be said there.
Yeah,
that it
I think that's a good point. It's a good point.
I think like one of the, so in the real world, right? Like we created all these like laws, right? We created the Constitution, right? We created these kind of like really, like a lot of the Constitution is focused around like how do we get people to kind of like live together who don't believe the same thing. Because when the country was created, that was like a common theme throughout the world, that there was this sort of just like oppression of people who were like minority groups that didn't fit in with other groups for whatever reason, right? And one of the reasons like those rules were needed in like the real meat space world, right, was because like people are born into particular lives. They live in particular areas. They sort of are who they are. And a lot of the things about their life cannot just be like subbed out, right? Like if somebody is born in California, but they would have been way more comfortable in like rural Mississippi or something, especially if this is like, 90, 100 years ago, it's not necessarily that easy for everybody to sort of like self-segregate smoothly. So you need to have these structures in place so that everybody doesn't like kill each other, right? But I think Balaji talked about this a little bit, right? The idea that like in the digital space, like we have the ability to like, maybe diversity is like a bad thing, like after all, like maybe in the digital space, right, everybody can like sort of like self-segregate into these like hyper specific groups that have these very specific declarations. And this is what this community is about. This is what this group is about. This is like the ethos of it. If you belong, join, otherwise go somewhere else, right? And in the digital space, right, like for Brantley to go to another protocol, right, he doesn't have to move across the world or anything. He could just go to a different protocol. Like there's a lot more mobility. So like that's maybe one possible outcome for this, is that we actually just take it to the other extreme. We go, actually, no, we're not going to do the tolerance thing at all. We are going to like hyper segment, and we're just going to be very clear about whatever. One of the problems of the ENS, right, and I don't know if this is necessarily a problem, right, but correct me if I'm wrong, like it's not like the ENS like website anywhere was just like, we believe that like homosexuals or, it's not a thing that they would put on their website, right? But like obviously a part of the community, a large chunk of the community just like thought that was like a thing, right? Because that is like just a belief of most people in this space, I think. But maybe it doesn't have to be that way. Maybe like everything, maybe the market hyper segments, maybe people go to very specific communities where they want to exist and believe in those things. And maybe that's fine. Maybe that just lets the free market like do its thing. Like maybe there's another domain service and like the market just decides it doesn't like ENS because of that. And maybe that's fine. Maybe that's okay.
Yeah. So I think to close this topic, we should actually finish with what we, like what's really the belief here personally. I don't know if you could really call it alfalfa, but I would just say it's at least something that is like actionable out of this. So go ahead, Nick.
I mean, I think where I land as of right now, and obviously reserve the right to change my mind for sure, because it's definitely evolving, but kind of like Brian Armstrong's take on the no politics in work culture. And he kind of describes it as a mission focused company. And as an owner of a business, as a leader of a business, that's all I really care about. Like you, Armand, I've had employees, partners, contractors of all different sorts, flavors, colors, preferences that you can imagine under the sun. And I really don't care. Like I want the business to execute what we as a group set out to accomplish. And that's all I really care about. And if someone has whatever views, like don't bring it up in company meetings. If, we're not here to politicize social unrest or global pandemics or religion or anything like that. We are a mission focused company. Our job is to, grow the company, deliver profits for shareholders, and accomplish what we set out to do. And that's all I really care about as an owner. And so as a protocol holder, you are in sense an owner. And so I think we should kind of carry over that mission focused, mantra to protocols. And if someone interferes in that, brings their own personal views into that and disrupts the function of the business, and like Eric said, it could be argued that just by simply having those views, you caused a disruption in the business. I think that's a little bit of stretch for me, but that's kind of my, I guess, filter on how I view this. And if it happened in my own
so
company,
question, like,
irrelevant.
would you, so like you don't bring that to work. Does posting on Twitter constitute bringing that to work for you?
Okay, so that's a good question, and I think it specifically doesn't, except there are for sure exceptions. If you are a leader of a company, if you are a CEO, if you are most definitely a public-facing portion of that company, whether that's you're in charge of business development, interacting with like a global community of business partners, you're in charge of PR, communications. There are a whole list of roles where you are kind of lending your brand and your personal brand and the company are kind of mixing to put forth what you're trying to accomplish to the greater community. Then in that case you do have to have some discretion in how you behave yourself publicly, because it can bleed into the company and people can get confused about what does the company believe and what does the person believe. So I think there is an exception for public facing roles and certainly leaders of companies.
Excellent.
So that's kind of my exception.
I want to specifically, in case I forget, I want to comment on that as my closure. Eric, what's your kind of, what would you wish to see in the future for things like this in Web3?
I think, well, that's a tough question. I think like in this case is maybe different than what I'd like to see in Web3. In this case, I'm glad that it was self-policed, like ENS holders and participants and whatever, TNL, like it handled itself. So, like it worked out in a way that I think everyone's going to be okay. And I think to Nick's point, Brantley was the face of this whole thing. He was like the mascot of ENS. But I pretty much said my piece on this. I think he's going to be okay. He's very talented. He's going to land on his feet somewhere, and it's going to be fine. And ENS is going to be fine as well.
I think for me, and to just generally summarize this so we've been on it for a while, but it is very fascinating. There's so many layers to this. Very much think that Stephen just better articulated some of my thoughts as well, where I think that, we're living in this new decentralized world where we're saying that decentralization matters. We're saying that DAOs are an entirely new structure for how we govern organizations, and there's a lot at stake with the way that can play out. I mean, the whole crazy minority example is a very real thing that can create mutiny pretty quickly in any DAO. So I actually land in a place for now today where I think it's important to allow these organizations to evolve in a way where the individuals move where they feel they are a good fit, and the moment that they're not, they vote with their digital feet and they move on, like a Balaji-esque sort of digital thing. And I think that is probably a great play and probably the safest way for this world to evolve, so it doesn't end up being like a remix or a repeat of Web 2 or of the world we already live in general. So it would at least be different. It'd be nice to see that experiment play out. Vote with your feet. If you don't belong and your Catholic views are not welcome there, go somewhere where they are. I think that'd be really interesting. I still don't think it's right what happened.
It's nice that you can actually do that in Web3, and that's maybe the one hope, right? The problem in the real world sometimes isn't necessarily that, businesses and consumers do things and we don't like them, but they have the right to do them. The problem sort of becomes when we enter into these situations where we start making laws and we start compelling people to do things, or they end up in situations where they don't have a choice. Right. And even if we may disagree with the Brantley thing or agree or whatever, it doesn't really matter, right? There's no law really that we can pass in Ethereum to prevent Brantley from getting a job or to right. So we're going to force the space to kind of work this out in an experimental fashion, and there's not going to be some centralized power that kind of comes in and messes that up, which is good. I mean, I still do worry about what the culture of the people in Web3 is ultimately going to be, right? Because ultimately those people will define, what the ethos is, right? Even if like there will always be freedom for people to do whatever they want, it still could be bad. Like I did see somebody was Eric Wallace posting about an interaction he saw on, like, I don't think the Brantley thing is necessarily what I would call like wokeism or something. It's a guy saying bad things, people didn't like it, and they got together and were like, we don't want this, right? But like Eric Wallace posting some like weird stuff from Twitter Spaces, where like there are dialogues where like some black woman was talking, and I think a famous developer, Hudson Jameson, like just sort of like butted in like a little bit like people do and the thing, and it immediately became like oh no, this white man did not just interrupt me. And then there's this weird like kind of groveling apology thread under it, and like that's the stuff, like that stuff like makes me like worried. Like that's really the I hope that we can kind of get away from that culture here. If that's what the market decides that it wants, then I guess I have to go along with it. But it's definitely my hope we can build something different.
Well, so just to wrap up my point, we can move on from this because it is really fascinating. It's like, I do think that there's a right way to do these things. I don't think that it needs to be like this whole cancel culture mob way. If somebody at ENS uncovers something they don't like to see from that individual, they should all have a conversation about it. And it should be a conversation about like, do you really belong here with those views? Because to that earlier point of like organizations that are built on beliefs that are alike, maybe he realizes that due to that, like he's not a good fit for that organization, and they're able to figure it out a little bit more behind the scenes, a little bit more delicately. It doesn't need to be that you ruin somebody's entire life and reputation. Like, is he going to be fine? Yes, most people who end up getting canceled end up being okay in the long run. Some of them, but it's a digital record that stays with you forever. I think it's pretty fucked up. I think it's fucked up to go out and try to like hurt somebody like that for something that they may have said that is a personal belief, especially one like Brantley's. And I could be in the minority here, but one last thing is like what you said, Nick. I think you're right. When you're in a position of power, it's very important to be careful and to have discretion. I agree. And I still think that that's too constricting. It's forcing your job, your ownership in a company, your work identity, which is one of maybe 7 components of your life, to encompass your entire life. That's a problem for me. Like, speaking personally, I don't like that because I want the ability to say what I believe, and for human beings to have the ability to differentiate those and go, this was an opinion about his work, and this was an opinion about soccer, and this was an opinion about his non-religion, and that's okay. And it shouldn't affect. Is
this a good case for everybody being like anon in the future?
I don't know.
Maybe this is cool. Like in the
or pseudonymous, at least.
I mean, in the I mean, in the real world, like it sucks. Like if your reputation is destroyed, like especially if it's destroyed unfairly, you're done, right? You are who you are. At least in the crypto world, you have the ability to become like a new anonymous frog tomorrow and start from scratch again.
I just think it's lame. I think it's lame, Nick. I would love your comment on this, but I think it's lame that I can't be my full self because I hold a position of, And
I think your point hits home in that I think what a courageous response would have been, and maybe it would have been right, is if whoever the power to be, I don't know the name of the person who kind of communicated the decision to fire him from True Names Limited, would have been, I don't agree with what he said. In fact, no one at this company agrees with what he said, but never in however many years has he been working with us has it influenced his work in executing the mission of this company. So therefore, we're going to keep him because he executes his job well. Again, we reinforce that we disagree with his views, and he's basically on watch. If we see an instance in which he is being prejudiced and, pulling those views into how he helps run this company, then we will certainly fire him. Yeah. And until then, we won't. And that would have been a courageous and possibly right, at least in my current thesis on how this might play out, thing, and might have satisfied a lot of parties and said, hey, we're going to issue a joint statement. This is what I believe. And I've never allowed it to prejudice my way of executing this company, and I won't going forward. And if I do, then I'll certainly, be held accountable for that. And that would have been an interesting turn of events. I think maybe lead us into a new nuanced conversation.
Well, I think that's possibly how to turn a corner in the conversation here. I think that's possibly how Spotify is trying to handle the Joe Rogan situation, albeit there's a lot more money at stake and a lot more leverage on the side of Mr. Rogan to Spotify. But it's similar in that the CEO of Spotify was very clear that he's absolutely against what Rogan has said and done, and yet he doesn't think that it's a good idea to punish it across a variety of different ways that the people at Spotify and the artists that are on Spotify want to punish it. The most extreme being take him down completely, to censoring, to a whole variety of different things that different people want to do. I think that it was the right approach, because he actually said, I think like verbatim, slippery slope, that if we were to start to censor what he's doing in any way whatsoever, it would be a slippery slope. And while we don't agree with it and you're unhappy, and he acknowledged their feelings and how they all feel. And I think that was really important. So to start to unpack this a little bit, like the Rogan one has a lot more going on.
Wait, Armand, can you just give the what real quick on like what's happening with Joe Rogan? How many episodes have been removed? Why? Like, like which ones?
Yeah, I mean, my brain, and as you saw with the Brantley thing, like I tend to not go into some of the maybe details at times and try to think more.
I mean, there's been like over 100 episodes removed at this point, right?
So
I don't know if the number is 120, 170, but it's a lot.
I thought it was like 70. So I'll give a very quick,
it's
20
pretty
second.
Sure it's over 100 now.
So Rogan has been on air on his own independently for a long time, 11 years, over 1,000 episodes. He was signed by Spotify for an undisclosed amount that is reportedly $100 million to publish the episodes exclusively, to license the episodes exclusively to Spotify over a series of years. From the moment he signed on, the Spotify employees were upset because of a lot of the things that he says. He has a very controversial stance on a lot of things, controversial in air quotes, because it's against a lot of what is today acceptable and popular in the narrative, and also like in the Overton window of like what should and should not be talked about. A lot of people believe that the guests he has on are very right wing. That's also controversial for the other side, because they say no, it's actually not that way. In general, he does a lot of things that are just generally unacceptable by the left, and a lot of the people at Spotify, and a lot of obviously our country is leaning that way these days. And yet at the same time, Joe Rogan has been like a beacon of truth, and has been like, honestly, I think he's very similar to us in the sense that he really tries to hold the opposites. He really tries to have nuanced discussions. And those discussions, because they are, I mean, I said this in our chat the other day, if you ain't left, you're right. It's like a Ricky Bobby, like if you ain't first, you're last. If you ain't left, you're right. Like it really has gotten to the point where if you are not directly in line with that way of thinking, then you must be right. Like that's the only logical conclusion. So where we're at is that, Neil Young was like, I don't like all this misinformation. I'm going to step down. I want you to either remove him or remove me, or I will remove myself. And Spotify said, we're not removing him. And a lot of other artists have spoken up. And then after that, he got called out for saying the N-word, which is really weird that he does that in general. Like, I don't think anyone thinks it's like cool. But he's done that. He's done that when he's commenting on like Quentin Tarantino movies. He's done that in general as a joke. He's done that for a multitude of reasons. And he admitted that it was stupid and wrong. And it was something that was like more okay in the 2000s and the 90s, but not okay anymore. So he's under fire for a lot of things. And a lot of people think it's like a pretty coordinated attack. So what do you guys think?
There's two different transgressions there, right? There's the COVID misinformation, or like here's the accusations of COVID misinformation, and then the racist language and racist tropes. And I think they're two separate issues that we should kind of like make sure we separate from the. What's the third?
Issues.
What's the third?
I think there's a very distinct divide between the jokes about black people being monkeys and saying the N-word in the context of reading when somebody said it. Like, I think it's unfair to lump those two things together.
Yeah, you're right. Because
one of those is like way worse in my mind. You know,
well, it's one's racist language and one's a trope, right? Like,
well,
it's
I think this
really
trend
bad.
of like firing people because they say the N-word in a way that's like academic is like ridiculous. Like, there's that like leftist professor that was fired because he read it in like a lyric or and just like a totally academic, like I don't even understand the purpose of like having a word in the English language if it can't be like used for anything. Like to me that's like excessive. I'm sure I'll get like hate from that, but like just from like a logical, just like a reason-based logical perspective, it just seems obviously very different to be a professor explaining the word in a sort of like contextual sense and somebody who's literally calling it to somebody's face as like a racial epithet, right? And I think it dilutes like the true like horror of the word and its etymology when we just like it's like silly to me, right? So that part like I'm just like so uneasy about that. The black people as monkeys kind of joke, right? That was like hard to listen to. I think we could. That was
really hard to listen to. It was terrible. I mean, I texted you guys immediately after. I was like, new information has come to light. I was like, this really affects my position because it's like something that the most important part here is to say that I think it's important to be honest. Saying the N-word and making jokes like that used to be barely okay in some contexts. It's completely not okay today. That's the difference. There were times where a comedian like Joe Rogan could get away with it. And he did.
So I'm wondering if we should have this conversation. Sorry, Eric, go ahead.
I was just going to say that it was always racist. It was just that racism was okay to an extent in the 90s or whatever. Racism was okay in the 90s. Now it's no longer okay. Like that was racist as fuck. I mean, period.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's clear.
And actually we're not being before you go, Nick, we're actually not being fair because none of this happened in the 90s or 2000. I mean, it's in the last 11 years that he said it a bunch of times. So that's in the last, it's still recent, but again, he has his excuses for why he said it. He gets high. This is what I said in my little like breakdown of it. He gets high, he gets drunk. He was quoting things like he said it was disgusting and wrong and he's super embarrassed, but it has nothing to do with the point of where we started. So Nick, I think that's what you're trying to get to.
I guess I'm just wondering, should we have this conversation and kind of not go into detail who it is or what they said, but should we have this conversation of censorship, on a company level, on a government level, cancel culture without actually going into the details of what he said? Just
because we're not TMZ and it's a waste of time.
Yeah, it's a more interesting conversation too. I don't think anybody wants to sit here and listen to 4 non-black people talk about the N-word ever either. So we should probably just move on from that. But like, there's more. There's still like interesting stuff to unpack there. I agree, but like, what are you thinking? Just the generalized principle of like grace and where lines are and like what we should strive for. Like,
what do we want as a society? Like, what do we want things to be open about, and what do we want to draw the line on? And I kind of look to, you can kind of look at most cancel culture comes from the left. So I try to look at like, who are leaders of the left and what do they think? And I actually found something interesting. I looked at President Obama and Jon Stewart. President Obama is a political leader of the left. Jon Stewart is a culture leader of the left, if you will. And they both had this very strong view about anti-cancel culture. Like, Obama's warned about it several times, almost every other year. He kind of mentions in his speech that like, there is a concern of going overboard and just constantly condemning and punishing people. And his point is that it's not real activism and it doesn't actually change anything. And I think Jon Stewart's, kind of view is you shouldn't abandon, you shouldn't leave, you shouldn't cancel, you should engage the other party. He's had Bill O'Reilly. We were kind of doing the fuck it, let's do a live skit here, and Bill O'Reilly's on the opposite side of Jon Stewart, but he's had him on the show to engage him. And so
those are good.
There are leaders of the left. They have views of anti-council culture, and that pretty good arguments for not going down that path and not feeding into that beast, and instead, going after, I think Obama's point is going after real activism, and Stewart's point is, we'll engage that person. Let's have a conversation about it. So that's one topic we go down, and another is like, is it? And David Sachs mentioned this in the All In podcast, which I kind of wrote down, which is it liberal to kind of not want these views, or is it authoritarian, regardless of political spectrum? We saw like Trump be very authoritarian, and in his case, it was pretty clearly selfish. Like he was being authoritarian and kind of pushing down the press because they didn't like what he said about him. And, it seemed pretty clear it was selfish. And in this case, it seems like liberals do it because they're doing it for the good of everyone else. And it seems like in that situation, there's like this presumption that a certain group, a minority group of people knows what's better for everyone else. So I think there's an interesting
authoritarianism.
Right. So like, are we talking about authoritarianism or liberal?
We are. It's disguised.
I think the framework is a little bit simpler, right? Like, because you touched on this a little bit with the Obama and the Stewart thing, who I would argue both of them are not really left anymore. Like they're centrist. Like it's so crazy, but Obama's like a centrist at best in like modern America. He's not very left. But like, there's an important distinction in people who sort of push this ideology and like sort of like, what is their motivation, right? Like, are you pushing these ideas, right? Are you censoring Joe Rogan? Are you doing these things because you want to like actually enact like lasting and fundamental change in the world? Or are you doing it as like a power grab? And in the vast majority of these cases, like, I think that the people who are the instigators of these things, right? I think there's a lot of people who come along for the ride who are like good-hearted people and feel like they're doing the right thing, and they're sort of like unaware that they're like these unwitting accomplices in this like larger scale power game, right? But I think a lot of these dynamics are not about changing the world. I think they're not about making the world a better place. They're about one group trying to usurp another and like reclaim power. And these ideas of like racism and all these things, they're just like tools to cudgel people and get power. Because as you said, if they were serious about actually enacting change, like Obama said, you would be focused on these other areas of like you're obviously not going to change it's not like the idea that you're going to just call half the country like wild, racist, xenophobic, transphobic, like ignoramuses, right? And that they're just gonna like wake up tomorrow and be like, oh, you know what, you're right. Let's just like live in a leftist paradise and like kumbaya and live that. It's obviously not gonna happen, right? And anybody with like a tenth of a brain knows that that's not going to happen, right? So you're either like very knowledgeable of that fact and you don't care, right? This is what, like you go down the full road of like Antifa, right? You're like, yeah, sure, like we don't care, but we were just going to take it by force anyway. This ultimately is going to be a thing that devolves into force, and then that's a logical, like a coherent ideology. It's a very bad and dangerous one, but that at least makes sense, right? This ideology where you are sort of someone standing in the middle and you're supporting this like very like oppressive authoritarian cancellation of people and disparaging of people and just like, and you're doing it like because you think it's going to change the world, like that is like you're in some like misguided realm of the middle where you are not doing anything that's at all sustainable. At best, you're doing something that just makes you feel good temporarily, but like ultimately a lot of these policies, a lot of these ideas, a lot of the stuff that's happening is just going to like further ruin the world, not make it better. And if people were actually intellectually honest and serious about change and not power hungry, they would realize that and they would prescribe different things, less authoritarian things, less cancellation, more just active engagement of stuff Joe Rogan says, why it's bad. Sunlight is the best disinfectant type stuff, you know? Like more of the stuff, like I think like Barry Weiss is really good at this, right? Even though she's like apparently right wing now because she's on Joe Rogan. But, you know, I like what she does, like kind of exploring these things. She just runs headlong into this idea and like, well, why is that bad? Let's kind of talk about it. What do you want to say, Armand?
Oh, Eric, I want you to have a stake at this because I know you've been thinking about it. Maybe not losing sleep over it, like me, but I know you've been thinking about it. So, what's your take on this? Because it's definitely, obviously, pretty important stuff.
I think Steven summarized my thoughts pretty closely, because when I look at the Joe Rogan thing, you know, just in isolation. Nick said it best at first. He said there's two parts of it. He said there's like the medical misinformation part, and then there's the racism part. Okay. But it all started with medical misinformation. And I put that in quotes because medical misinformation, I don't actually think that he was misinforming anybody, particularly with this COVID stuff. Like Armand, I talked to you when we were hanging out over the weekend. I said, like, I have a problem with this dogma called like science, capital S science, because like this idea, science is not fact. Science is a process.
Yes,
it's a methodology.
This was
they call it a scientific method. So it's a process of finding truth.
Yes.
So like
yes.
So like
God,
when
do you remember that "I am the science" quote? Sorry, I just like that was like the head explode. You're criticizing me. You are criticizing science. I was like, I'm out on everything this guy ever says.
You can't reenact memes, Steve. I need to see.
That's not a meme. That was a literal thing.
It doesn't translate on a
It doesn't
podcast.
translate.
But let me just keep going.
It's not a meme. I'm literally quoting Fauci.
Okay, let me just keep going. Let me just keep going because like I think this idea that I'm on is like,
please.
When people are out there saying like, well, just trust the science, trust that, like, okay, science is a process, meaning like we have to learn over time and iterate and like get closer and closer to the truth. So like with COVID, we've seen it play out in real time. Like science didn't know, like nobody knew about COVID. Like when something's brand new, nobody knows. And science is trying to get closer to the truth, right? That they're using their practices and methodologies to try to learn about what the truth is. But when people lean on that dogma to say like, hey, this is the truth, meaning science is the truth, lean on science or scientists, like it's already flawed. And I think what Joe Rogan was doing was like leaning on other scientists, meaning like leaning on other like people with other ideas, like also using science, meaning iterating, trying to understand, get closer to what truth is. So it's not actually medical misinformation. It's actually just using science. It's like, it's actually taking in all the data and applying it and trying to get closer to what is actually real.
100%. I mean, we've watched that play out. I mean, we talked about this over the weekend as well, where, you know, a lot of the so-called controversial beliefs and conspiracy theories ended up playing out to be correct. Some of them, a small percentage of them I'm referring to, but you know, a lot of people ended up being correct about a lot of things. And the point is that is what a scientist would do. They would have a radical acceptance of all beliefs and they would examine them without dismissing them right away. And I think a lot of what we see is like, to really zoom out, for me, this is like, it's not about misinformation. It's not about racism. It's not about Rogan. What this is about for me is ultimately obviously about power, and the powers that be are saying that this person is a loudspeaker that we need to control. And what Joe Rogan represents in terms of his loudspeaker is one in the middle. The left is represented by a mob of people, which is a populist group of people. Like it's the majority of people today in America. And so there isn't necessarily any one leader. It is a group of voices that are all echoing the same thing. They have the power, they like it, and they're doing it under the religion of good. The religion that they are fighting for is the religion of virtue and good and helping others. So it's a very, very psychologically complex thing to zap yourself out of. It's actually really fucked up. And most people who haven't fucking snorted purple pills yet, like us, it's really hard. You should start with like maybe a little baby line, because it's a lot. It's a lot to wake up to the fact that you're trying to be a good person, but you're actually hurting people by worrying about other people's rights, when really you should just be concerned with what is truth, what is logic, and remove yourself from group thinking. So really what's happening is like you have a mob on one side, and you have centrists in the middle. Like I would say one representative of is the intellectual dark web, or Joe Rogan as a whole is the biggest voice today. And then on the right, I think some people would agree with this. Trump didn't start this way, but like Trump very much represents the right and some of the right ideology. And he has these beliefs, and a lot of people that like you'll find really going to the extreme ends. I know I see Steven's head going like this. I agree that like on a nuanced level, I'm not using the best example there. But the point is that there are different people and different loudspeakers and representatives for each side of these aisles. What Rogan represents is a risk. And that risk is that a lot of people that are on the left today, their beliefs are being changed by someone who's approachable, likable, nuanced in his thinking, rational. He's a homeboy. He gets high, he gets drunk, he shoots animals. Most people don't like that. But what they like is that he keeps it real. When he does wrong, he apologizes. Everything about him is very consistent. He's very consistent, and he owns his shit, and he's very mature. And they like that they see a guy who clearly didn't start out to be like extremely intellectual, who as a result of exposing himself to very intellectual people has learned how to think. That's why people get tattoos of Joe Rogan on their body, because what he represents is the idea that I can learn and I can become an intellectual through the process of exposing myself to things like this. That the truth isn't black and white, that it's gray and it's messy, and it requires snorting some purple pills every once in a while. And I think that is a huge threat politically to the left, and that is why there's probably a lot going on behind the scenes that we don't know about.
I think it's important to point out like why canceling or censoring helps people in power. Like why would be the motivation for someone, under the mission of doing good, why it helps them? Because I think once you understand that, you'd be like, okay, this is possible. This is possible that this could be their incentive. And I've tried to think about this a little bit, and I think there's a few reasons why someone would censor and use this power to help reinforce their current powers and grow them. Like one, there's like this virtual signaling, right? AKA it feels good. It feels good to do this. I think that's an easy one. There's virtual signaling going on. Like same really like Garcetti says he's holding his breath while he's, taking pictures, not wearing his mask. Like it's obviously not true. But why does he feel he needs to do that? Because he needs to virtue signal. One, he needs to maintain his power by virtue signaling. Two, I think another reason this happens is like you need your base support, right? Either you want them to still support you, your core base as the political power, or you fear their backlash, and or you need their funding to stay in power. I mean, that's a political reality, and so you can't abandon that. But then I also think there's this like form of elitism. I know what everyone needs. And to me, this is the biggest pitfall, that as a leader, you can pretend to know what everyone in this country needs and what's good for them. I mean, we are a country of 330 million people of all different geographies. And it's so presumptuous to pretend like what someone else wants to hear, or what they need in their life, or what they're okay doing for their health, for their family, economically. I mean, people come from very different backgrounds in this country. They come from different DNA of different parents, and they also are raised in completely different environments. And that's where I get a little, I guess, most triggered is when people, assume to want, the same thing in someone in LA wants as someone in Appalachia, who grows up in a completely different economic security framework, and also a different environment, geography that they grew up in. Like there are people in this world who want different things for their family than you want. And that's okay. That's awesome. But for someone in power to assume that they know what people need is, to me, the biggest pitfall.
So Nick,
and
I've
there
thought about
is
that a
historical.
lot. I want to talk to you about that.
Yeah, sure. I just, the other comment I want to make is like, there is a history of government. Once there is an emergency or a problem that we need to take hold of, and we need to clamp down on misinformation, there is history of government using emergencies to gain power and then not giving them back. Right? Like a good analogy to me is the war on terror. Right? We had a tragic, terrorist attack on our country in 9/11, and our response was to give the government power, give them budget, give them power, let them solve it. And we saw like the Patriot Act get enacted. That's one other thing. But then also we went on this multi-decade campaign of like bombing the fuck out of a country for what 20 individuals did. And I don't think people know this, but they hatched this plan in Hamburg, Germany. It wasn't like they were sitting in a cave in Afghanistan, like hatching this plan together. Like those plans were made in Hamburg, Germany. So we took, okay, how are we going to punish these 20 people that committed this crime? We're going to go and take our powers and bomb the hell out of a country. And we kept perpetrating that over 20 years. And I think the second and third order effects of that we're feeling, now on a global stage. But so to get out of that one example, I just think there's historical precedents for government saying there's an emergency, we need to take power, and we happily give it to them because we want them to protect us. But
it's almost like a playbook. It's more like a playbook than it was like a crisis.
I agree, and there's a distinction. I don't think there's a group of people who are like, this is a great example to grab power, we're going to hold it, we're going to do something bad. I think it's the nature of institutions. Like institutions, just as companies want to survive, and you do anything to survive, and you naturally, as a group of people, as you organize, want to keep the power that you have to accomplish the mission that you're set on to do. At no point have I ever heard a government agency or large institution said, you know what, I think we accomplished the goal, let's fire ourselves, the problem's done. No, it like keeps evolving and morphing, and the problem gets bigger, and there's scope creep, right? And so I think the biggest thing out of this I've got is like, we have to be very careful about what powers we withhold to central organizations, particularly governments, because they don't tend to relinquish that power back in a non-emergency situation. I mean, we're about to have a Super Bowl in California, and it's still under a state of emergency. I mean, if that's ever like a slap in the face of, where we're, maybe we escape from that example particularly, but I just think we have to be very careful about what powers we hand over. And that's the biggest fear, because of the second order, third order consequences of that.
So I've been thinking about that a lot. And I think that we all agree with that. Like, no question.
Right.
How much of that is like really just subject to the personalities of people as a whole? We have this personality where we don't like authoritarian systems, where we believe that we know what's best and we would like to make those decisions. We tend to lean more libertarian. A lot of people, and this is where we see politics play out, like this is our representatives in action. We've given them this power. This was our fault. This is society's fault that we're in the situation we're in today. Like, yes, there's historical precedence for it. But how much of this is just that there's a lot of people that would rather have somebody else do the thinking for them, that would rather feel safe knowing that somebody's done their homework about the science with a capital S, about the vaccine, about the war. I vote for you to take control of that. You and I and all of us, we sit around, we like this shit. We like this shit. We like to sit around and look at the details and think about it and go to the study and look at the like, oh, actually, here's what's happening in Israel lately. Most people don't give a fuck at all.
Yeah. I mean, here's an interesting point, is that we don't need the government or Spotify censor, because everyone made their opinions about what Joe Rogan said already. They already made an opinion when it was said, and they decided to, say something against it or to subscribe to it. So like it worked out already.
The Joe Rogan thing is like, obviously it's obviously like stupid, right? Because you can just listen or not listen, right? And that's
Right.
just sort of it. And if you were making arguments beyond that, you're really going down some stupid road where you're basically applying that humans are these like just absolute plebs who can't be trusted to like think about stuff and make decisions, right? But what you are alluding to is like a deeper and like more complex issue, right? Like the idea that like, oh, humans want to offload decisions because they're too lazy or don't want to do it. That's like sometimes true, but also it's just like it's not realistic, right, for us to all be health experts, right? Like we need to have functional institutions in a lot of areas. Like we need, like society would be better if there was like a CDC that had general public trust, right? I don't necessarily like, you know, subscribe to this belief that like, oh, we could just live in this like sort of anarcho-capitalist like libertarian paradise where just like everything will just self-assemble and everything will be fine. Like that may be true, and maybe that's sort of like less bad than the other extreme, but that might not be the ideal society. It might be better to strive for a society where there is government and there are institutions, but they're functional because they certainly served a purpose at one point, right? Like one of the problems of the world today is that like institutional trust is at like an all-time low. And like, I don't trust our institutions. I think the vast majority of them have completely failed us, right? But I don't want to like get rid of the concept of institutions, and I don't know if the world can function without them.
Because
I think we
there
just
is
have
a
to think
role
about like
for
how to like
government.
rebuild them, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course there's a role for
Yeah, we
government. So
need
what
it.
should it be? Like, how do we fix the problem? Like, how do we make government better? Like, how do we balance all these principles? Because I totally like what Nick said is a really good first principles thing. If you want to get good at first principles thinking, like it's like one of the best ones that I've come across is just this idea that like the sort of collective wisdom of the market and individuals is like almost always better without fail than like centralized top down thinking or authority. Like almost always get better results that way. Just from a results perspective, they also have the problems that Nick talked about where they sort of tend to just, you know, coalesce power and become like these kind of self-maintaining bodies that no longer exist to do the original thing they were created before. But that's almost like a secondary issue
this does
to the fact that they're just not as effective in the first place.
This does go to like our conversation as well about how we'd like to see it play out in Web3. I mean, like we're talking about the same things, and these are decisions that we have to make. And look, like personality, disposition, beliefs, religion, all these things are a factor that encompass a person's how they vote and how they want to live their lives and how many of those rights they believe are theirs versus how many they would like to give to institutions and the government. And so much of that is like a little, constant process of how much are you being brainwashed by institutions. So it's like it's very difficult to figure out where that line really is of what a human being innately wants, needs, is healthy, how much of it is like a part of their personality and natural disposition versus how much they were taught or told to believe they should own or not own and give up to others. And this is a complex thing that I don't think is really ever going to go away. I realized I'm like, this is just the new ongoing battle because all we have is like this access to information like never before, and we're moving away from institutions, we're moving away from traditional media, and we're moving to citizen media, which is like us. This is where people are learning now, and people's brains are like jambalaya, rightly so.
So how are you handling that? Or not handling that?
Generally, I was great. And I really have been like on a high and like enjoying it. But like lately, maybe because of what's happening over the last couple of weeks, or maybe just because of what's going on my phone, like with the number of apps I have and the notifications I get, it's too much. It's way too much. Because, I lied to myself, Nick. I thought that because I don't watch the news, I don't turn on CNBC or CNN, I thought that I was like, ooh, you're like staying away from the noise. But the reality is the noise on that phone is probably 10 times worse because the access I have is like WhatsApp, Telegram, text message, Twitter, all sending links to all the different places that you can possibly get a link, and you're trying to read it as fast as you possibly can, and it drives you crazy. And you're trying to work, you're trying to get things done, you're trying to have like a healthy life situation, and I think it's too much. It's just way too much. So I recently read Dopamine Nation. I mentioned this to you guys in the thread, and it's an okay book. I think the main thing I took away from it is like, it wasn't like wow, but the main thing I took away from it is like to be way more conscious of the amount of dopamine I'm actually like like letting off over the dumbest things. It's unnecessary at this point, and I need to be more in control of it. It's too much. We don't need all this information. I don't know. How are you guys handling it?
Yeah, I mean, I was happy when you brought this up today, because this has been a struggle I've like fought with like my whole life basically. I think I became aware of it like in my mid-20s, like this idea that, you know, dopamine is a thing, and it's like this dragon that you sort of chase. Like there's like these two chemicals in your brain that are really important, right? One is sort of like oxytocin, and the other is like dopamine. And they're kind of like opposites in a particular sense. Like dopamine is this like dragon you chase constantly, and like oxytocin is sort of like the cuddle hormone, the feel good one. And when you like dopamine is this thing, it just like transcends like so many different activities you do. It's everything from like watching porn to scrolling through Instagram to like doing cocaine or whatever your, you know, illicit substance of choice is. It's all the same pathway, and like all of these things in our lives kind of blend together to the point where we're like becoming these heroin addicts who are so wired that like they just like need their next fix, and everything gets like totally messed up. And the reason I got like super jacked up back in the day is because like I used to be a professional poker player, and I became like so good at playing multiple tables at a time. You know, I would rig up my keyboard so that I didn't need a mouse anymore.
How many games at a time?
So when I'd play high stakes, I would play fewer games. But if there weren't high stakes games running, I would drop down to like a lower game, and I would play like 30 games at a time. Right. So I was playing like 3,000 hands an hour sometimes. It was just like boom, 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 boom. It was crazy. It was like I was just playing this video game.
I would not survive that.
Well, like after a while, like after like years of doing this, like I did start to notice that like my like behavior was like changing in the real world. I noticed that like I became self-aware. I was becoming like really like irritable. My attention span was like shrinking to like nothing. Like people were annoying me. I was like kind of like unable to like get like satisfaction out of like smaller things in life. Like I needed just like overwhelming stimulation to like to get, like I'd be watching a football game while scrolling on my phone, while playing a video game on my iPad. It was just like insane. Like my brain was just like nonstop. And I did like a 2 or 3 week dopamine fast at one point, where you just cut everything out, like phone and everything. And like the first like few days were kind of annoying, and then it became like hell. And then like by like, I mean, it probably took like 14 days, honestly, to get anything. But like, I felt like really good all the time, actually, once everything settled. Like I would just exist in the world. I'd go outside and I'd be like, look at that bird. It's so nice. There's a dog over there.
The
right?
And then like, I stopped.
I keep going like a hippie. Yeah. So like, I'm totally back there now. Like crypto's ruined me, right? Like I'm just always on Twitter. I'm always trying to find the next coin, the next protocol, what's happening, and it's just like awful. Like honestly, I'm thinking about taking a little bit of a break right now, just because.
Well,
like,
that's definitely what I'm doing.
Correct.
And that's actually I would love to lay out my personal protocol just for people who might be experiencing the same. But Nick, I feel like you might have some tips for me as well. Like we were texting a little last night, and I was just mentioning to you, I'm like, it's just too much. I think that this is a lie, that like just because I'm not watching the news, I'm so modern, I don't listen to the news. But really, I'm on every fucking app. I'm on every like place I need to be to get the latest access to crypto. It is the same thing in a remixed format for a Web3 junkie, actually, is what I was like, oh my God, I just realized this. And then I was like, well, what's missing? Well, first of all, our trainer went viral. Shout out to Kyle Bogeman. K Bogues. Yeah, K Bogues on YouTube. By the way, if you're into calisthenics and just getting fit in general. This guy is the most beastly, manly human being in the world. And he rightly just went viral very recently and like went from like 5,000 to 100,000 followers overnight on YouTube. He has an incredible YouTube channel that we'll link to, and you should definitely check out. Like absolutely phenomenal. We have the privilege of having trained with him in person, and obviously now he's very famous and he's getting like 1 million views every video. But anyway, I realized I was like, okay, I'm really missing that. But you think about this a lot as well. Like, what are you doing to like fast information and
this
stay healthy?
This is tough in crypto in general. Like Steven said, I mean, if you're trying to keep up in it and be an active investor and also just learn for the space long term, it's a tough thing to you first of all got to, I think, realize that you're never going to get everything, and you have to be okay with that. You're not going to hear every project that comes out. But I think in general, I just want to be able to consume knowledge on my own terms. So I don't want notifications. I don't want, I'm do not disturb 24/7, have 0 notifications popping up on my phone. And so at least like if I want to dedicate 30 minutes to like seeing what's going on, it's on my terms, not on someone else's. I think that helps. And then curating your Twitter feed has been the most powerful learning tool I think I've had. And the curation is ongoing. We always like to use the phrase, like, you're the average of the 5 people you hang around the most, and you're going to become the average of the people who allow you to feed you information. So you have to be particularly good about it. And the cool thing about Twitter is that you can dissect, what kind of information you want to hear. Whereas in like typical cable channels, you're not able to do that as precise. And so I think that's important. And there's a whole list of things that I know I should do, but I don't do, which is like meditate frequently and like get out in nature more and dump the phone. I remember when we came back from our Kilimanjaro hike, like I didn't pick up my phone like for multiple days. Cause I was like, well, I just learned I don't really need it. I don't need any information. I don't need to like, pipe my knowledge full, my brain full of like whatever is going on in CNBC. And then it slowly creeps up and back again. So there's a whole list of things that I know I probably should do, but don't do. But anyway, I think just making sure you consume information on your own terms is probably the best thing, but by no means.
You're making it sound really simple, but that's really important. It's really important.
I mean, Eric,
98% of people are not on their own terms. Yeah.
I mean, Eric, you're kind of straddling crypto and traditional markets. And like, I like to do that. It's like almost like addicted to it, but like, how are you straddling both? Because you're managing crypto money and traditional money. You have to straddle both worlds. And that's like, seems like the worst of it out of any of us.
It is. It's hard. But it goes back to that the Mexican fisherman parable that Armand brought up. It's like, how much do you want to devote your efforts to like scratching and clawing and striving to like achieve the next thing versus like, hey, you're doing what you actually like right now, and just enjoy that, and you don't have to fight so hard. So like where I'm at is like I resonated with what you said. Like, you're doing it on your terms. I've been doing it on my terms for a long time. And, like my intellectual curiosity is going to continue to push me to learn more and more. But, it's not this constant pursuit of like, oh my God, what am I missing? What's the FOMO? What am I missing that I'm not like striving for? So, I mean, this is a whole nother conversation.
Well, not to get like too deep into this, but like, I mean, honestly, I'm curious as like a friend, like, where do you think that started? Like, what advice would you give to a friend who's like the complete opposite, who like can't handle that feeling of getting enough, needs more, can't itch it enough? Like, how have you learned to develop
more
that
edge
feeling?
How do I get my
how
edge?
have you learned to just be content? It's a question of contentness is what you have out of all of us, by far the best. I commend you for that. I always have admired that about you. I think it's amazing. You're content. How do you do that? Help!
There's no answer. It's like it's YMMV on Reddit. It's like your mileage may vary. It's just a personal thing. Like, my personality is
personality,
that, like,
upbringing, everything. All
Yeah,
of it?
and like having a bigger picture in mind, maybe it's like having a wider perspective, maybe, but like maybe not. Like, I'm not trying to
Is
say
your
that,
is your personality though just like a different layout of like dopamine receptors in your brain? Like maybe your brain just doesn't have the highs and the lows. Like, and maybe my
Right.
brain is like a crackhead's like brain. Like maybe I am just super susceptible to the dopamine rush and the dopamine crash. Because like when you talk about like contentment, like a lot of like contentment, and people are like, oh, you gotta wake up at 4 a.m. and you meditate and all this stuff. But like for me, like when I think back in my life and I've been like really content for periods, like so much of it actually just directly correlates to just like turning the noise down. Like when I go through long periods where I like reduce the stimulation or I take long breaks, or like I had a period like a month ago where I bet my buddy like $100 a night that I would just sleep with my phone in the kitchen.
Oh.
And for those 2 weeks, like I was like so peaceful. Like the first night I was like definitely tweaking like a crackhead, right? Like in bed, like I was just like reaching
Wait,
over
why
the
aren't
fan
we
and
all?
checking the tube,
Why
and
aren't
there was
we all
nothing
know
there.
this is good for us? Why aren't we all doing this? Like, do you
Because
wanna
we're
do it again?
addicts. Like we should
Yes.
do it and we won't do it because we're literal addicts. But like those 2 weeks, like I woke up in the morning and then I was just like, well, I guess I'll just get out of bed because there's
Last
nothing else I
night,
can
I
do.
picked
I
up
was
my
out of bed
phone.
like an hour earlier, and then my
Yeah.
brain wasn't immediately just filled with stupidity and like stimulation, right? Like I like went outside, I looked at the sun come up, I sipped a coffee, I like pet my dog, like everything was like really good, and I was like, this is amazing. I'm gonna do this forever. And then as soon as the bet was up, I went back to my phone in my room, and I've been there ever since. And it's like 2 hours before I fall asleep, and like an hour when I wake up. It's so bad. I think about my screen time, and like all of it's not dead time. I do learn a lot of stuff. I do make a lot of money doing it, but it's definitely hurting me more than it's helping me. This is my public cry for help to anybody who's listening.
Steven has his head in his hands. For those who are not watching on YouTube, Steven is full stress
Oh, that was
mode.
beautiful.
Steven, I'm gonna need you to convert the fund into BTC, ETH, and stable coins, stake it in Curve, and take a vacation.
Can I? That'd be great.
Steven's vacation is actually including writing a best man speech, so stress does not stop.
Oh, man.
Yeah, and I get to go to court.
Oh
tomorrow.
man, we purple pilled the hell out of everyone on this episode. We didn't really do any
Yeah.
crypto. I feel like we should end with just a tad bit.
We don't always have to talk about crypto. It's fine. Do you have some good alpha?
I know.
My
I
alpha
know.
is
Can
going
I
to be
give-
that people
can I-
really.
can I-
Here's
I
some
know-
alpha for people. Invest in those like fancy clear ice cubes. Like, oh my god! Like when you talk about like what you get for your money, it's such a
Nobody
marginal
wants
increase,
that.
right?
Nobody needs
Oh
that.
my
Nobody
god!
wants
Like
that.
no. Somebody
No.
out there is drinking whiskey with some shitty like cloudy
hold on.
cubes, and their
Can
life
we-
is about to change.
Can we drop our looks? Like, can we commend ourselves for our looks alpha? Because that looks alpha was fucking spot
Please
on.
explain, Eric. Please explain.
Fire.
Well, yeah. So a couple episodes ago, maybe the last one or two episodes ago, last episode we talked about this token that we were all invested in staking called Looks Rare, and we mentioned how the cliff is looming, the cliff where they're going to decrease the rewards, and we said, you got to be careful with this cliff looming. Like even if you believe in this thing long term, which we might, I personally do. You got to watch out for this cliff that's looming. And sure enough, the token dropped by, maybe 40%, 30%, something like that.
From at the time of recording, it was $5.50 last time we recorded when we mentioned it, which was almost a near peak.
Hope you
And
sold.
currently it's at $3.50. So I think the alpha is like, it would have been a good time to sell at that moment, ahead of everyone else selling into that rewards decrease. And then the further alpha is, I think February 10th is when the rewards kind of half, and we'll let the market kind of settle and figure out what the right price is. But looking to kind of maybe
I bought
re-enter.
again. I re-entered.
Cool.
First of all,
Yeah, I think
you guys keep
I'll be looking
mispronouncing it. It's called alfalfa, not alpha.
Oh, sorry.
And and secondly, the real alfalfa is you should be listening to us and following along. That's the real alfalfa.
You would have saved
I
yourself
gotta-
40%.
I got one more.
But also
I am
don't
looking
do
at.
anything that we say, please.
Yeah, right.
I think
You
there's
know
a,
what we mean.
I'm looking at kind of in the in the looks rare category, I'm looking at Immutable X because they are a layer 2, which will serve as a platform to a bunch of NFT marketplaces. They just announced like a partnership with GameStop. GameStop's going to have a game NFT marketplace, and so I've been looking at this token. I think right now it's kind of below the ICO price currently, and I'm trying to dig into the tokenomics to see if the token actually reflects if the platform's value accrues to the token, and it's not particularly clear to me. But like, I guess that's just something I've been looking at and trying to dig into.
That is a gross chart.
The IMX.
Oh, major oof.
Or yeah,
it's just down. It's just down only. This is a GameStop partnership, brief blip, and then we're back.
I think GameStop took the rewards that they got and just straight up sold it into cash, by the way, which might be the reason that
did they?
They fully dumped all 100 million they got. They dumped it.
Oh no, say it ain't so.
Oh God. Anyway, this thing peaked at $9. It's currently at $2.72. Again, maybe not fully underwater to when it ICO'd at. I don't actually know what the right price was, but it's below where it debuted at on the CoinMarketCap chart. Wow. So I think it's interesting that we should probably further investigate it because, if Immutable X is going to be the layer 2 for gaming and for marketplaces, it is a way to kind of play the market. It's just a matter of whether the value accrues to the token or not.
Yep. And
that's
let's
what
not forget,
hopefully we'll figure out over the next week.
So most importantly, I think first, Gary Vee also played a major role recently with his new secondary NFT launch being on Immutable X as well. And I think we'll see more and more of that. So that just kind of plays into the NFT marketplace idea that you mentioned.
I mean, I followed my 10% rule of just bought 10% immediately and, wasn't sure I wanted to ape in. And so put my 10% in and then, trying to understand whether the value on this platform accrues to the token. It does have this fee for purchasing an NFT on these Immutable X marketplaces where I think there is a fee, and 20% of that fee has to be paid in IMX. For the user, it's a seamless interaction. The 20% of their ETH automatically gets converted into IMX. So there's this market buy of the IMX token to pay for the fee. So, you could assume that, if there's enough volume on this thing, there could be enough market purchases to push the price higher. But I think there's a lot more to dig into to figure out if IMX is the platform of choice for, play to earn games and NFT marketplaces in general. Is it going to accrue to value? I think it was safe to say that the VC round, they definitely saw the value, accrue to them. It's a question of whether the token holders right now will benefit from Immutable X growing. I think it will, but we need to kind of do some further research. But something, no hard decision now, but something definitely worth looking into as a play on, NFT growth in general outside of OpenSea and outside of looks.
Awesome. Anyone have any last Alfalfa? I thought I would just mention my little experiment I'm going to do and maybe report on it next time.
Yeah.
If that's cool. Yeah. So I played this experiment before where I had a second phone and I have a primary iPhone. It does not work to get an Android because the whole idea was, just get a cheap second phone. But when you switch your SIM card from an iPhone to an Android, you're asking for hell. So you want to make sure that you're switching from an iPhone to an iPhone or an Android to an Android. You can get a cheap used one online, or what I bought was one on Amazon. They have a reseller program, so I bought an iPhone 10 at a nice price that is warranted for 90 days. That's just a little nerd nuance detail there. The whole point of this is to have a secondary phone that only has the most essential apps that do not it's not about the notifications. It's not about anything other than screen time does not solve the problem. Screen time limitations. I've played with every possible solution. What it ultimately comes down to is you have to remove the drug from the environment. There's no other way. You cannot have access to the drug. The only way to do that is to plug my SIM card into a different phone that does not contain the drug whatsoever, to make sure the other phone is off, not on airplane mode with Wi-Fi access so that I can go check Instagram. No, off, and switch from phone to phone. What I've done in the past, which has worked incredibly well, and again, all I'm really doing is I've already done this experiment before, but I just, instead of having an Android, I wanted a secondary iPhone. What I've done is I basically had this phone that I used on the weekends only. And as soon as Friday night hits, I plug into my secondary phone, and it has text, it has calls, it has Audible so that I can listen to books. It's got Spotify so I can listen to music, WhatsApp, whatever. And if maybe like one or two other things for like reading and learning, like Kindle and Matter app and stuff like that. Outside of that, Google Maps, Lyft, Uber, nothing else. Nothing else.
Wait, sorry, this is your weekend phone.
This is my weekend phone. This is what I generally do on the weekends.
Oh, it's the weekend phone.
The weekend phone. And what I'm going to do going forward.
And Tiger Woods also had 2 phones. Just put that in there.
Now, what I'm going to do going forward is actually try to find a new balance where this becomes my majority phone. So I would like this to be used more than 50% of the time is the goal. So I'm going to move it from weekend phone to like Monday. I'm basically trying to do like Monday through, Friday through Monday phone. And then just work my way to having like at least a 50% balance between these two phones. But I think the way it's going to play out, which I've already experimented with this in the past, is that I'm going to be more peaceful. I'm going to be more present. I'm going to just generally be calmer. And I think that, and more content. And I think that's very, very important, because I can just feel myself getting access to way too much information, more than I ever needed in the first place.
What if you miss the alfalfa? What if you miss it?
You guys will text it to me.
Yeah.
And the listeners will get it if they DM us on Twitter and join the Alfalfa community.
I look forward to your update on that. I feel like it's hopeless for me because I tried to delete Twitter and I ended up just going on it on Safari, and I can't remove Safari.
You end around your block.
I logged into Twitter on my, and at first I was like, oh, it's so much extra work, I won't do it. And then, you did? Tell me, how do you?
Don't log in. And
okay.
Don't log in. That is a big deal.
Just don't do it.
Don't log in on the browser to your Twitter. If I send you a Twitter link on text, right, you might want to open it. You open it and you might go down the rabbit hole. But at least you can, you can't, there's no way to completely take the crack from you.
You just told the alcoholic, just don't drink alcohol.
Look, the only other solution is flip phone. Flip phone and get off the internet is the only other solution.
Flip phone might be the way.
Yeah. I mean,
Team Flip.
I talked to Nick about this. We considered it. But I think it's nice to have your Google Maps and your technology to a certain degree. Like, you got to have that stuff to a certain degree. All right.
It's a good purple pill episode. I like it.
Yeah. This is a good change. All right. That's a wrap. Any final comments or asks?
Nah, wrap it up.
Let's do it.
Let's go out on top. Later.
Peace.
Later, boys.
See you guys next time.
Bye.